Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah ta'ala, today's focus is on the importance of the forests. It's known as other names as well, just as the food forest or the ecological food forest. But today, to just cover the basics of what a food forest is and the importance of it, and that we possibly can, we should be establishing these in our communities, in our cities and towns, and even in our own homes, in our own. So it's a short workshop. Obviously, we're just covering the mere sort of basics. And if you have any questions, obviously, you can access the Telegram group and contact us there. Okay, Bismillah, we go on to the first slide, please. So very sort of straightforward step-by-step guide to establishing an edible food forest. So there's step 1, step 2, and step 3. Let's move on. So forests are teachers. So if we just look at the natural world, the natural world has since time begun. So turn to the natural world as a teacher. How has the natural world survived? How does it continue to work? And this is why we have to study the language of nature. And as Muslims, and there might be some who are not Muslim, but from the Islamic perspective, we have you could say we have 2 languages that we need to learn. One is the language of Arabic, to be able to understand the Quran. And then other language is the language of nature, and they actually come together. So forests are very important, and they teach us a lot, a tremendous amount. And I really urge you, where possible, and even if it means a journey, is to embed yourself and visit a forest, because in a forest, if we understand a forest, then we've basically understood the whole understanding of food forests. Next slide. Of course, just to reflect, so when I'm talking about forests, I'm not really talking about which is the world now, which is man-made forests. If we look at the UK, for instance, lots of man-made forests, and the species is mainly conifer trees. They are planted, and they're planted without mother trees, and some of you may know what we mean the term mother tree. If not, less in depth, but if you go onto our YouTube channel, we cover the importance of the mother tree, but how that connects to Surah Ibrahim. But the majority of forests that are planted today are man-made, and they're planted only for and the trees are grown only for a period before then they're logged and then transported and used to you know, make furniture, etc. So forests as a teacher, I'm really trying to emphasize the importance of the natural forests. But Muslims we need to understand trees, because trees, well, inshallah ta'ala, we will cover this at some stage in the future. Trees have a very close relationship to us as humans, and you know, trees are throughout the entire planet, and trees play a very important role in the Quran. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala focuses on the importance of trees, as well as Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And in fact, and we won't go into it in depth, I do have videos on this, and as we progress the month of Ramadan, I think we're going to be covering this more in depth. But in Surah Ibrahim, I think it's verse 23, 24, Ta'ala focuses on the good word, which is like a good tree. And then further down, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the bad tree. So what is the relevance between Surah Ibrahim, the good tree, and a food forest? Well, the focus on Surah Ibrahim about a tree that has its roots firmly in the ground and its branches that rise to the sky, which then give us a wonderful crop of but to know more about this tree, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't go into depth, then we have to connect to the Prophet Islam. And he then explains to the senior companions in Medina, and that's another lesson as well, because the verses in relation to the tree, including the bad tree, were revealed in Mecca, and our beloved messenger Sayyidina Muhammad explained more about the tree in Medina. So that's another complete topic. But just to there, if we, subhanallah, if we understood these verses, particular in Surah Ibrahim, in that verse, which has the most important verses, ayah, in the whole of the Quran, so important that it was taken out, and the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, emphasized the importance of this verse, that he had to teach about this particular tree. And if we understand the importance of this verse completely, we've understood the whole message of Al-Islam. The whole message is in Surah Ibrahim, subhanallah. But when we connect this to food forests, obviously they are very important, because when we start to look at growing our own food forest or edible food ecosystem, then we need to look at diversity, and we need to be able to study a forest, and we really need to be able to study a natural forest, a wild forest, compared to what a few moments ago, which is a man-made forest. Because in the man-made forest, you're guaranteed there won't be a mother tree, but in the natural forest there will be mother trees. Okay, next slide, please. So this slide shows you on the left hand importance of the mother tree, and for all intents and purposes for our lesson today, why the mother tree important for us in relation to food forests is, as this slide shows, and Jazakallah khair, brother Hamador in Bangladesh, is the root system. The root system is key in establishing and making sure that you have a healthy, edible food forest. And if you don't have a strong root system, then you end up like the slide on the right-hand side with a bad tree because its roots are not firmly embedded in the ground, which goes back to that verse, the ayah in Surah Ibrahim about the bad tree. And so, you want to make sure that when you are developing your edible food forest, that you're selecting the correct plants, shrubs, trees, etc. And they really do secure their roots in the ground. Next slide. So food forests, the importance and the relevance prices. So just to recap, if we go back to Heartsea, so Heartsea is a global movement which has been established to make humanity aware of the crisis that we are in, and it is a crisis of perception of how we see the world that have been conditioned since roughly the 17th and 18th century to see and to think in a certain way. And this connects very much to the Dajjalic system that we are living in. And it is a crisis of perception that we are seeing the world through a particular lens that sees the world disconnected in its silos. It doesn't see everything connected. And to the 17th and 18th century, the world was seen in a completely different light. And so what we need to do as, and not just as Muslims, but as mankind, is to see through the correct lens. And of course, I have to say, through the Quranic lens, because the Quran was sent not just for Muslims. The Quran was sent for the whole of mankind. The Quran does not say that it was, and the guidance is for Muslims. So we are, it doesn't matter where we are realizing that we are facing economic issues, we are facing social issues, we have a Ukrainian war going on, we have issues between America and China, we have sadly had the earthquakes in and Syria, we've had floods in Asia, and right down to New Zealand. We've had dramatic scenes of snow in California, and it's affecting every aspect of the world. Increasing disorder, crime. So our social, our political, our economic systems, our whole way of life is breaking down. And these are clear signs that we are coming towards the end. And as the ulama, the scholars say, that why we have to understand about eschatology, which is the end of times, which is clearly mentioned in Al-Islam and taught by our beloved messenger, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the importance and relevance of the food forest is if we just take the UK, it's supposed to be a high, rich Western country, part of the G7. But if we go to our supermarkets now, we are facing a crisis of no vegetables and no fruit. A scarcity. Unbelievable to think that the UK wouldn't have tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, and certain fruit. And so as to why. Some say climate change, some are saying the energy crisis and the war in Russia and Ukraine and the hot weather, and for us really to understand all of this, we have to understand systems thinking, which then connects to really under the whole message of the Quran, which is through systems thinking, which is through the right brain hemisphere and not the left brain hemisphere, although we do have to tap in hemisphere. And if you don't quite understand what I'm talking about regarding the hemispheres, inshallah ta'ala, as we progress through 2023, we will, but it is all related to food forests. So we need to be able to move away from corporate world, the supermarkets, the elite that control our food production. That's without doubt. So if food is becoming scarce, imagine what it's like, or, well, it is scarce in many parts of the world. And this will soon become global. There are major concerns, and it will become worse. And so what do we do? And, well, there's much we can discuss, but really need to do as individuals, as groups, as families, as communities, is to learn about how to establish a food forest. And food forests in the end of times, and we are in the end of times, without doubt, will be crucial, be survival, and the food forest will definitely help us, because when the scarcity of food increases, believe me, even your neighbor, your friends, maybe even your families, when they are starving, they will ransack your house, and there will be a rise in violence. People will be starving, and that just won't happen in the so-called third world, and there's no third world. It will happen even in the so-called Western world also, and it's beginning to take place here. Now in the UK, believe it or not, we actually have food banks. People are starving in the UK. Subhanallah. So food forests are important. And they are important because to protect us and our families and our produce in these difficult times, we need to be able to grow our food source so it mimics the natural world. And so here, our food source will mimic a natural forest, which means that our food source becomes camouflaged. Okay, that helps to protect our food source for our family, for our community. Next slide. So we need to set a goal. Step one, what do you want from your food forest? So, you've agreed as an individual, as a community, we need to establish a food forest. So again, first of all, you have to look at the plot of land. Are you talking about something in your back garden? Are you talking about the funding to get land or a farm? Okay, that's part of step one. But what do you want from your food forest? And on different circumstances, for the individual, for the family, okay, it might be, I just want to grow enough vegetables and fruit for the family. So that's what you want. For somebody else, it might be, I want to grow my own vegetables. I want to grow my own fruit so I can become semi-self. For somebody else, it might be, I want to grow my own fruit and vegetables because I want to separate myself completely, which means I want to become totally self-sustainable, and I want to go off-grid completely. Okay. And, for somebody else, it could be, we as a community have decided that we want to come together as a community and grow our own food, and we want to learn from the food, and we want to establish a nature center, we want to establish an education center, whether that is connected to off-grid living or not off-grid. So you need to work out, what do you want from that's the first thing. Okay, step 2. Next slide, please. Explore, sit, observe, and analyze. Now, Brother Hamador, he's a permaculturist now as well, alhamdulillah. And so what we have to do, we have to turn to permaculture, which is not the focus today, but permaculture is it's a design system. Okay, it's a design system which what we're trying to just sow the seed for today. It's a design system which mimics the natural world in order to grow our own vegetables, fruit, and maybe even have livestock. And there are a number of principles in the subject of permaculture. And so if we want to establish a food forest, whether it's in our back garden or in a piece of land that we bought, and let's just say that we've now got that land, okay? What we need to do is to deal with principle 1, a long subject which goes into permaculture. But principle 1 of permaculture, which is a design system, is about observation. On the Islamic perspective, observation, which is seeing and looking, is very important because it connects to the Quran. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala throughout the Quran commands mankind to study, to reflect, to look, to see, by using the eyes, but also the heart. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will use different words depending on what seeing is very important in the Quran, and it's important in permaculture. That's why it's principle 1. So it means explore, sit, observe, and analyze. So what on earth are we exploring, sitting, observing, and analyzing in relation to a food forest? Because we haven't even got a forest, we've just got a piece of land. What's important to you all is patience. The natural world has got where it is today. It continually carries on because it's work according to the commands of the Creator. Okay, universal laws, and just to digress, is the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, why don't you just look at the natural world, see that it's working in harmony, perfectly in order. It's working to the commands from Allah. Likewise, I put insan on the earth, and I want you also to establish the same rules as you learn and you can see in the natural world. So this is very important in relation to a food forest. So what we need to do is to observe the land that we've bought, or our back garden. We need to look for sunlight, we need to look for shade, we need to look for how many hours a day there is sunlight in a certain part of the garden or on the land, how much of the land is shaded, the rainfall. Where does the rain lay? Are there any puddles? So we need to look at the wind direction throughout spring, summer, autumn, winter. Likewise, we need to look at the sun direction, the amount of sun, sunshine, and shade, again, throughout the seasons. We need to look at the wind direction. We need to examine the soil. We need to what else is taking place there? What other biodiversity is there? What else is living there? What other plants? What other? Okay, so we build up a picture over, and as permaculturist, over approximately 1 year. So I'm saying to you that we are in the end of times, and I'm saying to you that we're in a global crisis, and we must try and establish a food forest. But it won't happen overnight. It requires plan, and this is why we need to go to permaculture, which is a design system. Okay, so that's the first thing that we need to do, is to observe. Okay, and this is why we need to, where we can, is to spend as much time as possible in a local forest, a natural forest, to observe the forest. Okay, so we can see what's going on. It's all about using nature as our teacher. Next step. And so the design, you need to then design your food forest, okay, depending on that you worked out all of these other things over a period of between 6 months and a year. Then you start to then design your own food forest. And so depending on the available land will determine what trees you can grow, plants you can grow, what shrubs you can grow. That will depend. And so it's all about then designing your food forest. Where do you want this? Where do you want that? Where do you want? Okay. So now it starts to get a little bit more exciting, because now you're putting all your observation skills down on paper. Next slide. And again, mapping. Mapping is very important. Okay, we need to map everything. So we need to join. Remember, I said to you at the beginning, we're in a crisis of perception of how we see the world. It's a deliberate crisis. It's a crisis that has been there since the 16th, 17th century. It's been been set by Shaitan and the system that we are in to take us away from the Creator, from creation, to see things disconnected, whether we're looking at social, political, environmental, and to see things in silos, to see things disconnected, whereas we should see things connected. And so math is about connecting everything. And again, that begins with the principle 1, which is observation. But, and I mentioned this also many times in our YouTube channel, about moving from thinking from the left brain hemisphere to the right brain hemisphere. Next slide. So when we go and spend time in a natural forest, what are we doing? So when we see a forest, okay, so we want to establish a food forest, and the first thing I would say to you is, well, you go and spend time in a forest. So then you say, okay, so what am I? Okay, so this is part actually of principle 1, although principle 1 is about observing the land that you've got, but it also connects to observing a forest, because the first slide was, nature is our teacher. Okay, and this connects very much to the first revelation revealed to Prophet Muhammad. And so when we look at a forest, Okay, what are we looking at? So we are looking at an ecosystem, and we are looking, when we look at a forest, I'm talking about a natural forest, we're looking at an ecosystem. And we are looking at trees, different species, and looking at a forest which is at different layers. Okay, everything is at different layers, and we need to understand this. Look what's growing there, why is it growing there, and mimic what's growing there, and then try and implement what you and establish that in your back garden or your piece of land. Okay, and in a forest, through the observation, to realize that there are 7 layers of a forest. And in this diagram, it shows you the first layer, which is the canopy, which is the large trees. So, you go to a forest and you'll always see the large trees. If you just look at a forest, you've arrived by foot, you go down in the footpath, you see the opening to the forest, all the large trees at the back. They are the large trees, the canopy. The second layer is the low tree level. Okay. The third layer is what we call is the shrub layer. That is the herbaceous layer. The fifth layer is the soil surface. So we're really down to ground cover. And then the sixth layer is here. We get down just to diverse here. Roots, remember, we can connect that to the Quran and sort of able tree, the good word, like the good tree with the roots embedded in the ground. And then the seventh layer is the vertical layer, which is your climbers and your vitae. And you'll see them, if you observe correctly, in the natural world. So when you are observing, so if I said to you, go and observe and just sit in a natural forest, what are you looking for? You're looking at an ecosystem. So you need to be able to understand ecosystem. You need to understand systems thinking. You need to then understand, so what is an ecosystem? That's very important for your food forest. And you need to be able to see the different layers within a forest. Okay, so there are 7 layers. Doesn't mean to say that the forest that you visit has, it doesn't mean to say that the food forest that you're going to grow should have 7 layers. Okay, that's why it connects to observation. It depends on circumstances. Back to what do you want from your food forest? It might be you've only got a small garden. So if you're in the city of if you're in the city of London or New York, okay, and you've got apartments around you, well, of course, you're not going to be able to grow the big large trees. Of course you're not. You probably won't even be allowed to grow, that's by law, the low tree level. Okay, you might be able to then grow from the 3rd level, spacious, etc. You might not even be able to grow any of that. You might not even have any land. You might just have an apartment. So you just have plant boxes. Can I establish a food forest? Yes, you can. It becomes in a forest garden. Okay. Next slide. And so remember, we're talking about establishing something that will not happen overnight. Okay. You can't rush the natural world. Okay. Everything works according to the commands of the Creator. And so year 1, the basic 3-year project, you really have to set yourself basically a 3. 1 is the planting. This is once you've done all your design, etc. Year 2 is establishing itself. in year 3, then you go into up to year 5. Year 3 is beginning to take effect. Now, if you do have enough land, then the first thing that you need to do, and again, it would depend on wind direction, if there's strong winds there, so then you need to establish protection. So you would need barriers, so you would need wild hedgerows, you would need to establish them. That takes time. You would, first of all, grow your canopy trees. Why would we grow our canopy trees? So the large trees, okay, have the larger roots, and the benefit of having those large roots established in the ground with all of the other trees. And in time, inshallah ta'ala, whether it's in your lifetime or your children's lifetime, if the earth is still here, and that's down to Allah subhanahu, that canopy tree may actually become a future mother tree. But again, this connects all the time very much from a spiritual Quranic perspective to Surah Ibrahim. So when you're planting, if you just look, you've got enough land to plant your 7 layers, you start with a large tree and you wait for the large trees to establish, and then you go to the 2nd layer, then the 3rd layer, and then the 4th layer. All right. What we haven't covered, the food forest, is an addition, because some people like to add in something which is different from your fruit and your vegetables and your trees that produce nuts, is livestock. And that could be chickens, it could be goats, it could be bees. Okay, and you can incorporate them, and that's another subject. You can incorporate them in your food forest. Next slide. But the whole point is, we don't want, in the end of times, which we are in, and when we are facing a global crisis, we don't want to have sufficiency project in our back garden or in our community looking like this. Believe me, you do not, because you're asking for trouble. Because just take the UK, we've got no tomatoes, no cucumbers, no peppers, no fruit. And, I went to the supermarket this morning and there's nothing there. It's not as if you can put fruit or vegetables and store them in your freezer. It's fresh produce, but people go crazy and it will become worse. And if people see this, which is vegetables planted in rows, which is a monoculture, which is how the agricultural system is today, because it's part of this way that we've been controlled to see and to think and do, then your produce will be stolen. And if you've got animals there as well, they will also be stolen. So you've got to move away from this to the next slide. To this, okay? You need the camouflage food forest, the camouflage edible ecosystem. That's what you need to establish. Ideally, away from your home. Okay, if you're in the mountains, if like Brother Hamador, who's in Bangladesh, into the hillside, if you could obtain, in an ideal world, if you could obtain land in the highlands to establish an edible food system, which is camouflage, then those people that are coming towards you or in search of food because they're hungry and they're coming with knives, with guns, with machetes, and they will do, and because of how they've been controlled to think, they will look at this and think that's just a forest, it's just overgrown bushes, and they will pass you. But if they see what was in the previous slide, they will ransack you and probably kill you at the same time. Okay, so the question is, but what happens if you had chickens and goats and bees? Now, okay, so that's not to say that they wouldn't come in then and then take them, but they wouldn't understand what was going on, because beside this here is your fruit trees, your nut trees, your vegetables, right in at every single layer, and you've designed this food system that continually throughout the year at different seasons and different times it's producing vegetables, fruit, nuts. Okay, and that's your life support system, and it becomes a complete ecosystem where you don't need to go in and do much. You don't need to do any digging and weeding. You even leave the weed. Okay, it itself becomes self sufficient. Okay, a normal garden, you don't even need to dig in there. Okay, but to get to that stage, it takes time. And what you must work on, which is part of your planning, is, if we go to the next, is whatever you grow is you must create guilds. Okay, to have a successful food forest is to create guilds, meaning, and we can, if you want to ask more, you can just ask it in the Telegram accounts, is to, you've decided to grow vegetables, you've decided to grow herbs, you've decided to grow nuts. What fruit, what nuts, trees, what shrubs, etc. What species, okay, support one another, help one another, right? And so this is about creating these guilds, what will support one another, what will help one another, and so they are in a symbiotic relationship, right? Some may provide, one particular shrub may provide sunlight to another, provide shade. One particular shrub or the canopy tree will have its roots firm in the ground, so then you've got the benefit that because of the roots, it will use its fungi to support, to feed, to nourish the younger shoots. So it's about working out what shrub, what tree what tree is going to help in this community, right? And communities is also a big point that Allah mentions in the Quran. And if you do your planning right, by principle one, which is observation, you will have a sound food. But it would take at least year 3 before you start to see it actually coming alive. So it takes time. It takes time, okay? But it's important. It's important. And it could be a matter of life or death. So I'm saying to you, start planning now. It's very important. I think that was the last slide. Jazakallah okay for attending. Questions, you can post them onto the Telegram account. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.